feeling lost and I know where else to go now. I don't really have a place to call my home now. Everybody hating on, I feel so cold now. Why do everybody make me feel alone? Like I'm feeling lost and I know where else to go now. I don't really have a place to call my home.
It was nice. A little odd since all the females weren't glaring at me, but it was all nice, Fu said, looking at the blonde male. Yeah, I know what it means, Naruto said, as he opened the door their room. Naruto knew exactly what she meant by them not glaring. He had the same reaction the first few days that they came to Taki. Of course, their smile of kindness were replaced a few days later when they started to live there. Fu, now that one of the glares at him again, he having the same odd feeling as when he first met Taki. Naruto then felt Fu hugging him and smiled slightly. When she did, either way, it doesn't matter. As long I'm with you, Fu said, still wrapping around Naruto. Yeah, Naruto said as he returned her hug and looked at her. He then leaned forward. At the two shared a kiss. When they separate, the two smiled and looked at each other. Guess we should get some sleep, Naruto said, his face as slightly shade red. When he said this, Fu nodded, and the two walked over to the bed and began to lay beside each other. Naruto wrapped one arm around Fu and brought her a little closer, and Fu turned a smile and nuzzled into his chest slightly. The two then smiled, and they slowly began to drift off to sleep. Naruto woke up slightly yawning as he rose up from bed. He was sleeping on, beginning to look around the room. However, as he did, he felt slightly pressure on his stomach. When Naruto looked down, he saw Fu with an arm around him. Naruto smiled, seeing his this, and slowly moved so that he didn't wake her up. The blonde then began to look around the room and saw a small bag at the entrance to their room. Naruto walked over to the bag and opened to see 2 cups of instant ramen and small notes with a word enjoy written on it. Naruto smiled, seeing this, knowing it was Shiro had gotten him for food, and walked other side of the room in makeshift kitchen. Naruto then opened the cup and began to make a small cups of food, hoping to surprise Fu. However, as he began the cup, he heard some footsteps behind him and then felt a small pressure on his back. Morning, Fu, said the smile as she hugged the blonde. From Naruto chuckled slightly, hearing this, and turned holding the 2 small cups, offering one to her. Shio left us something, Naruto said, looking at the green-haired female in front of him. Fu took the cup from him, hearing this, and smiled slightly. So where are we going after this? Fu asked, as she began to eat the small cups in front of her. I was hoping Shiro would have something planned, Naruto said, looking at Fu. You seem really trust Shiro. Judgment, Fu said, looking at him. When she said this, Naruto looked at her a little confused before panicking slightly and carefully. What she meant, not that a bad thing. She seems to trust him on this matter, Fu said, looking at Naruto. After she said this, Naruto finished slurping up some of ramen and looked at her. Of course I trust his judgment. He seems pretty smart. You have had to notice it too, Naruto said, looking at the female. When he said this, Fu gained a somewhat confused expression and looked at him. He's not very good a fighter. His Genkai helps him, but those powerful hits doesn't help him to hit his opponents. I think he tries to make it up with his lack of power and strategies. Powerless, Naruto said, looking at Fu. Fu was a little shocked to hear this and thought back to all the time they had spent to talking together. She had never thought about it before, but Naruto was right. During the training, he had never once managed to land a hit on either of them. Naruto then stood up and looked at Fu. Guess we should go see what Shiro wants us to do, Naruto said, looking at the female in front of him. She nodded hearing this and stood up and followed him behind Naruto as she did. When they walked out, they noticed another note on Shiro's door. Fu walked over to the door and read the note out loud. I'm going to be gone most of the days, so don't better looking out for me. Maybe you should explore the town or something, Fu said, looking at the note. Well, there goes our plan for leaving today, Fu said, looking at the note. Naruto sighed for hearing this and nodded and turning look at the female in front of him. I guess we'll explore the town, Naruto said, looking at the female. Fu smiled. Hearing this, and the two began to walk down to the streets. As they did, two noticed that there wasn't much that a small town had to offer. The two continued down the streets for a while until looked at the female beside of him and slightly red faced decided to grab her hand. When he did, Fu looked at him, looked away from his face, slightly shied red. Fu smiled, seeing this, intertwined her fingers with his, and the two continued to walk down the streets. As they walked, they heard some constant footsteps behind them, and Naruto looked at Fu. She nodded slightly, and they heard over was following them. The two then smiled and ran down the alleyway, a bit excited to lure whoever was following them. As soon as they did, the two quickly jumped onto the nearby building and waited for the figure to walk down the alleyway. However, they never did. It seems like they had just disappeared. What did you think really gonna go follow you into such an obvious trap? The two heard a new voice say behind them. Naruto and Fu both act an instant and turned and threw a kunai whoever was standing behind them. When they did, they saw a male with a long spiky white hair. The male then raised both hands, slid their fingers into a hole in the kunai, and looked at them. Relax a bit, slow down, but I'm sure we can fix that before the time is over, the male said, looking at the two in front of him. As soon as he said this, the two looked at defensive stance, and the male held up his hand with a kunai hanging from his finger. Relax, kids. I don't want to fight. In fact, I actually want to help, the male said as he dropped the kunai slowly at the indeed. Didn't want to fight them. My name is Jiraiya, and the truth is, I actually want to train you, and, or more specifically, I want to train Naruto, Jiraiya said, looking at the two in front of him. Train me? What could you possibly teach me? Naruto asked, looking at the male. He knew Jiraiya. The elderly male smiled, hearing this, and held up his hand. When he did, a blue spiral orb began to gather in his hand. I think this would be good place to start, Jiraiya said, as the blue ball disappeared. Why would you want to teach me that? Naruto said. Fu looked at the male in front of them, still skeptical of the offer. Let's just say I owe two old friends, Jiraiya said, looking at the two in front of him. The ease up a bit, hearing this, but still keeping their defensive stance. Just in case. What about Fu? Naruto asked, reassuring to the female beside him. I'm aware of your little girlfriend, and if you want, then she can come too, Jiraiya said, looking at the two in front of him. What about my other friend? He's not here, but he's important too. He can come as well? Naruto asked, looking at Jiraiya. He didn't care who this male was. If his friend couldn't come as well, then he didn't want to train with him. When he asked this, the male seemed slightly surprised before letting out a sigh. I wasn't aware he had someone else with him, but if you insist, then he can come as well, Jiraiya said, looking at the two in front of him. However, Jiraiya said, looking at the two in front of him, gaining their attention. Somewhat busy man as well. I'm impatient, so I'll need an answer before 5, or I'll assume you're declining my offer. I'll be at the lazy bar. If you decide to accept my offer, the male said as he jumped off the roof, began to walk away. When he did, Fu looked at Naruto. What do you think? She asked, looking at him. I'm not sure. I think we should ask Shiro, Naruto said, looking at Fu. She nodded, hearing this, and the two began to walk down to the town. So how are we going to find him? He he notes said he's gonna be gone for the most days. Fu said, looking at Naruto. After a few moments of silence, Naruto remembered something Shiro had said the day before they arrived, and looking at Fu. I bet he's at the park, remember? He said he wants to see fish they have here. Naruto said, look at the female and besides him. Fu nodded hearing this, and the two walked down the streets towards a small park at the town had. When they arrived, they saw Shiro near a small lake, bent down looking in the water with a small face and a smile. Wow, he really are Rainbow Bow Kill, Shiro said, slightly amazing, as he looked at the fish in front of him. As he did, the two walked up to him and slightly smiled, seeming him to enjoy what he was doing. However, their smile quickly faded when they finally reached the smell. Shiro then turned around to see the two looking at him slightly. What you two want? Didn't you see the note I left? Shiro asked as he continued to feed the fish in front of him. Yeah, but this is kind of important, Naruto said. Okay, what's so important? Okay. Actually, it's probably better if we went somewhere else to discuss this, Fu said, looking at Shiro. The white hair male was a little confused to hear this, but nodded. Nonetheless, after following the two, they began to walk down the streets, eventually returning to the building that they had left just a minute ago. Naruto and Fu then walked over to their room. Shiro followed behind them, began to sure to shut the door. As he did, Fu and Naruto sat down and looked at the white haired male in front of him. When they did, Shiro sighed and looked at them. Alright, so what's so important that you find me and drag me away from Kiro to talk about? Shiro asked, a little irritated by the two of them. Well, we met someone earlier today. Someone named Jiraiya, Naruto said, looking at the male in front of him. When he said this, the male seemed shocked to hear the name, and Fu noticed his reaction. You know him? Fu asked, looking at him, and Shiro nodded. To some extent. I don't know him, but I know of him, Shiro said, looking at him, at the female. Well, he came up to us and offered us to train, and I'm not sure what we should do since the Akatsuki are still after us. He could be one of them, he discussed, or probably working with them, Naruto said, looking at Shiro. If he really is Jiraiya, then I highly doubt that he's working with them, with the Akatsuki. But if you're right to be cautious, not to mention that if this is some kind of bluff, it's all of nothing. A criminal organization wouldn't be so stupid enough to hinge everything on something as risky as this. So I don't think he's with them either, Shiro said, looking at the blonde in front of him. Shiro.